Welcome to the Solo Mo Show, a weekly podcast hosted by Corey O'Brien, the social media strategist at Heat and author of thefutureofads.com.
And I'm Adam Hellway, CEO of the digital marketing agency Secret Sushi Creative.
Each episode, we discuss topics, trends, tactics, and tools related to social, local, and mobile marketing and advertising. Our goal is to give you the information you need to be a better marketer. Today is August 28th, 2012, and this is episode number 34.
In this episode, we're going to discuss the meaning of a like, App.net and the evolution of the social network, a review of PinReach, a Pinterest analytics tool, how to audit your Twitter applications, and more.
And as always, all of the links that we discussed today can be found at solomoshow.com, so make sure to check that out so you can take a deep dive into the topics that we discuss. Adam, how is it going today?
It's going all right. It's a little brighter on this side of the screen this time.
You do look bright and fresh as always, yes. What's going on over on your end?
Well, I wouldn't say as always. I think usually my crappy lighting in my home office tends to make my eyeballs look like deep sunken in holes with just black inside of them. And between some other videos that I've recorded in the podcast every week, back when we did the social loco event, I had purchased a bunch of studio lights for us that we didn't end up having to use at that time, but I knew we might have to use it some other time, and decided that today was the day to break those suckers out and see if I could make myself look any better. And I think it's doing all right. It's as much as you could say anything could make me look better, it's doing okay.
I think it's looking very good. It's actually making me reconsider my own lighting choices, because I'm looking very yellowish and you are looking very white and pure. So
how about what's been going on with you here?
We're doing a little bit of a late episode again this week. Actually had fantasy football draft, so I will take full credit for having to push this one back. It's a league we're doing at my office, and had to make do with wrangling a bunch of people's schedules together, and so apologize for that, but amongst all the other craziness running around, did a little bit of fantasy football, which is always fun.
Is there any cool online place to do fantasy football? I mean, I'm sure there is, but I'm not a fantasy football fan. So, is it all on paper still, or are you doing it online someplace?
It's online, and it's actually taking a nice shift into mobile. So, they've had the websites for a while where you can look up stats and you can manage your team, but that's actually moving into mobile, and it makes a lot of sense because, especially for fantasy football, the whole idea is you're looking up stuff, you're making changes, you're keeping up with your team as the week progresses, and so what better way to do that than with your phone, which you always have on you? So we actually run our league through ESPN, and ESPN has an iOS app. Unfortunately, it's iPhone only, because I feel like this would be something that would be perfect for the iPad, really dive into stats and have some fun there, but they do have an iPhone app. You can, read all the latest news, manage your team, get ready for the upcoming match. So it is taking steps into mobile. It's always had a little bit of social involved. You can, talk trash on social networks, that type of thing. Doesn't yet have local. You don't get any bonus points for going to your team's stadium or anything like that. But
yeah,
it is an example of an industry or a idea that has definitely embraced Solo-Mo and kind of used it to continue the engagement that it has with folks on an ongoing basis, not just when they happen to log into that website.
And previous, it used to be that you would have to track all of your stats and stuff like that. But now, does it do the applications track the stats for you and stuff? So it's pretty automated once you've made your picks.
Yeah, exactly. It's keeping track of stats. It's actually you can sort of run a simulation of what the upcoming games might look like and try to base your strategy off of that. So it's interesting. It's using a lot of data, and I think it's a good analogy for a lot of the tools that we look at on this show, where there's just a ton of data out there. And so really the key is not generating data, but making sense of it. When you've got tons and tons of data, a lot of times that can be overwhelming, and you're digging through this and you're like, well, what do I pay attention to? And so I think the challenge that a lot of these tools are competing over now is, how do I distill this down and make it useful to the people who are using this service or trying to access it on their phone or on their tablet or on their computer. That's actually a pretty good segue into the infographic of the week, because we had a infographic come up that was called what the world tweets and from where. And basically, it was a study that came about from examining tweets and looking at the types of contents those tweets contained. And it had some interesting results, so I wanted to share it on the show.
You have my permission. You have my permission.
All right, sounds good. So it actually came about from a new service called, and this is an interesting name, the Diffbot Page Classifier API. Sounds very official and not consumer friendly. So we'll call it the Diffbot because that's kind of more fun. So they used the Diffbot to analyze 750,000 links posted to Twitter to determine what's being shared, what content is being shared, what language is it being shared in, where is the sharing coming from. And there were some things that kind of surprised me. So running down a couple of these statistics, first off is they actually break down tweets by page type. And the one that stuck out is 7% of tweets that contained a link that they analyzed contained a link to a page error, so a dead page. So 7% of people sharing links inside of Twitter, when that link goes out, it's a dead link. Somebody clicks on that, and they don't get taken anywhere. They get taken to a 404 page or some sort of other, whatever you're trying to visit isn't here. So I thought that was a pretty good reminder. Check your links. Make sure that when you're putting links out into the world, they actually work. Whether you're using Excel and you're planning content ahead of time, maybe you miscopy something, or somewhere along the way your system just breaks. So make sure before you hit that tweet button that you copy and paste that URL into a new tab, test it, and make sure that what you're trying to send people to actually works. Because the last thing you want is for somebody to say, oh, that sounds like a cool link, and click it and get taken nowhere. And then they're thinking, who is this guy and why is he sharing crappy links? The other thing that was kind of interesting and stuck out at me, and I'm not sure if this was due to the sample size, is they looked at the most tweeted article sites. And it was measured in links per 1 million. So they pulled 1 million tweets, and they looked at how many of those million tweets contain links to well-known sites. So things like CNN.com, that showed up. That makes a lot of sense. Huffington Post, they've embraced social. Huffington Post shows up in 5,000 out of every 1 million tweets as a link. The number one site, can you guess what it was?
Well, I can guess because I'm looking at the list right now.
All right, there you go. Taking a quick look at the list. It's actually a site called Detik, I believe, and it's an Indonesian news site. So that's detik.com. Actually produces 12,000 links per 1 million tweets shared, which I thought was really interesting. It beat out the BBC, a well-known, potentially international news organization. So I'm not sure.
And you know why that's the case?
Why is that the case?
Because Indonesia happens to be one of the most active Twitter countries in the entire world. I've heard folks discuss in the past how countries like Indonesia and some of the other countries in the area that you previously didn't pay, here in America, we might not have heard a lot about or seen a lot about in regards to what they've got going on socially, some of the things they've got going on entertainment-wise and so on, have become worldwide trending topics because of the activity that those particular communities produce at any given time. So I think it may or may not have to do with the fact that that particular site has incredible news. It's likely it has to do with the fact that that particular site happens to be a local online news source for that region, and that region happens to be very active in comparison to the rest of the world.
Makes a lot of sense, and actually explains why the number 4 site was Kompas.com, Kompas, also an Indonesian site. So another couple things that jumped out. One was they looked at the most tweeted image sites, and actually Twitter is now the number 1 most tweeted image site at 40% of all images shared, which back in the day, this was TwitPic that really kind of reigned supreme, and then we saw Instagram come up, and I think what's happening now is you can post pictures natively inside of Twitter, and it actually serves those through Twitter's own image hosting service. And it makes sense. People are using the Twitter clients more and more, therefore it's going to be posting photos onside of Twitter. But I thought Twitter with 40% compared to TwitPic at now just 7% of all photo links definitely shows that Twitter is in the lead, and as a smart brand, I think it makes sense to adopt that. And if you're still using TwitPic, maybe evaluate the system you've got in place and look to transfer over to Twitter, because there's just a lot of nice additional benefits. The fact that when you share something inside of Twitter, it shows up in your sidebar, and it makes it more searchable and more findable. So I think it makes sense that Twitter is already at 40%, even though they just started taking over photo hosting duties relatively recently in internet terms. And then similarly for video sites, YouTube has 60% of all video links. Makes total sense. YouTube is the dominant player. But actually a bit of a surprise to me was TwitCam coming in second place with 9% of video site links. TwitCam is actually a service that you can use to live stream video through Twitter. Not really something I had heard of before, so I checked it out. It's actually powered by Livestream, the live streaming service, so it's got a big brand behind it. But apparently people are using TwitCam to communicate via Twitter, so I thought that was really interesting and potentially something to examine and learn a little bit more about. Anything stand out to you from this infographic, Adam?
Yeah, I mean, it did surprise me actually to see the delta between the amount of photos being shared natively on Twitter and Instagram, which came in at 15%. So between 15% and 40%, that's a significant jump, right? That's over double, and I think that would explain that. That when you look at the breakdown of content, that 36% of the content shared is actually images, which surprised me a little bit as well. Images are something that's popular to share. It's fairly easy to share, but I still thought that maybe just the general link to an article would be more popular. But it makes sense that Twitter itself being the native one, which again, it's only fairly recently, I think, as you even mentioned, that they've taken over from all the other services that were out there providing it. It seems to be getting adopted really, really quickly. And I wouldn't be surprised if this number ends up increasing, but I would also expect Instagram to be increasing as well. So that was what surprised me.
With that, I think we can dive into our first main topic of the day, which is the like a form of expression? And Adam, we're actually talking about this because you wrote a post about this on socialmediaexplorer.com. So why don't you take us through a little bit of that post, just a quick summary, and then we can talk about some of the issues that it brings up.
Yeah. So recently there was, and this is something I initially heard on the radio, that there's a Virginia court that is looking at a case where a Sheriff B.J. Roberts of Hampton, Virginia, fired one of his deputies, actually a number of his deputies, but one in particular is part of this court case, over the fact that when he was running for sheriff, that this deputy and a few other folks actually liked the opposition's Facebook page.
Whoops.
And yeah, well, I mean, it's kind of interesting because it's like I don't know the politics behind that particular action, and so this Sheriff B.J. Roberts obviously won, and so this deputy was working for him, and I don't know how the politics work, like why you say, well, this guy needs to be fired, whatever the case. I don't know. I don't know if I'd make that big of a deal. It just depends on what the politics are behind it. But the interesting part of the story here is that the deputy whose last name is Carter, is Daniel Ray Carter Jr., he is going to court telling them that this clicking of a like button should be protected under freedom of speech. And that by him clicking like is his own personal freedom of speech, self-expression, and therefore should be protected under that, and that he shouldn't lose his job due to that. The interesting part about this is we have so far one interpretation of this from the sheriff, another interpretation of this from Deputy Carter, and the judge himself is saying that a clicking like is insignificant self-expression and therefore should not be protected under freedom of speech. And last but not least, Facebook chimed in with an affidavit of support stating that they felt that it in fact was a significant form of freedom of speech. And this is where I kind of leave off here with my post that I was writing, is that I agree with Facebook, and there were some reasons why that Facebook said that goes far beyond just the clicking of a like button. And so a quick example is, when you go ahead and click, and in fact, this is exactly what Facebook said. It says when Carter clicked the like button on a Facebook page entitled Jim Adams for Hampton Sheriff, who was the opposition, the words Jim Adams for Hampton Sheriff and a photo of Adams appeared on Carter's Facebook profile in a list of pages Carter had liked. The 21st century equivalent of a front yard campaign sign, which is a real interesting, mental picture here of what it would be similar to. And in addition, an announcement that Carter likes the campaign's page was shared with Carter's friends, and Carter's name and photo appear on the campaign's page and a list of people who liked the page. If Carter had stood on a street corner and announced, "I like Jim Adams and Hampton for Hampton Sheriff," there would be no dispute that his statement was constitutionally protected speech. Carter made that very statement. The fact that he did it online with a click of a computer mouse does not deprive Carter's speech of constitutional protection. And so I find it really interesting what Facebook says here. And to me, it goes even farther that when people click like and they take it and they say, that's it, it's just clicking like, they don't really understand actually the extent and the reach of their content and where that action goes. They're so kind of engrossed in their own experience that sometimes when you click something in a lot of different, in a few social networks, this is the case, but in Facebook in particular, because of their reach with their data beyond their own social network, outside to all the places that use Facebook data as a way to authenticate who you are as a person and to potentially kind of initially bolster information that they have about you in their accounts on their particular service, that like actually travels quite a ways. And that data, as seen by others, is visible in a number of different forms. So clicking like by itself, maybe not significant free speech. That's questionable to some people, but the number of actions that happen beyond that and the statements that are made with that data with that like once it takes multiple forms, I think definitely expands itself to become something where there's a lot of interpretation to be had by people like your employers and your family and folks you know in church and other parents you might know in school and your coworkers, and in this case, what we're talking about here with our folks here at the Solo Mo Show, your customers, and how people perceive that like as a statement or an endorsement, as I like to call it. What do you think of that, Corey?
The thing that stuck out most of all for me was it feels like a little bit of a failure on Facebook's behalf. So they really forced it down people's throats. The like is the thing you click. The like is how you take action on Facebook. If you're showing support for something, if you're sharing something, if you just want to give it a little thumbs up, stamp of approval so that your friends see it, click the like button. But like doesn't really encompass all of the ways that you'd want to interact with things on Facebook or that you'd want to share things. So, for instance, when somebody is in a relationship that ends, that's typically posted onto Facebook. They'll say, "Oh, we broke up, blah, blah, blah." And then all their friends, a lot of times it gets a bunch of likes, and then in the comments, people are like, "Well, I don't really like this, but I wanted to show support for you." So there's no show support for this option, because that's kind of what these folks were doing, right? They weren't necessarily saying like, "I like this candidate." They were saying, "I support this candidate. I believe in some of the things that he believes in, or I'm supporting some of these issues, and maybe I don't even like the guy as a person, but maybe I support some of the topics that he's bringing to light," or something like that.
Maybe I simply want to connect to his page. It's not about actually the word like, right?
Exactly. Maybe I work for this sheriff over here, but I'm going to connect to this guy's page so I can get a little bit of inside intel and see what they're up to and try to use that to help my own cause. There's a bunch of other things that people do on Facebook that aren't represented by the like, but Facebook shoehorns those all into this like button. So it is a challenge because, as soon as you go beyond like, then what do you add? You've got support, you've got dislike, you've got, interested in. There's a whole range of emotions that you'd potentially want to include, and they do have to draw the line somewhere. Otherwise, you're just putting a text box, and it's like, type the word that you think represents your connection to this. But I do think that there should be other options. And, you look at other things like, I think Path is a good example of this. Path has various smiley faces, And then it also just has, I think it's like a heart. So, does this make you happy? Does this make you sad? Do you heart this? Do you, neutral on this? So you can engage with content in various levels beyond just saying, well, I like it. Because like is positive, but not every interaction is going to be positive. Sometimes you're going to say, I don't like this, or, hey, I want to share this, but I'm not supporting it. I don't like it personally. I'm actually sharing it because I dislike it. So it's a challenge, and it's a challenge that a lot of social networks face, and I don't think anybody's really solved it. But Facebook, being the leader, being this giant social network, should, in my opinion, be taking steps to help people express themselves beyond just a single verb, a single action.
Well, and you and I have discussed in the past how they're starting to break it down a little bit for other folks and adding what they call, was it their verbs? Is that what they're calling it?
Yeah, so verbs are words that you can interact with content through the Facebook system via their open graph. And you can term things other than like. You can create all of these custom verbs, but that has to happen off of the Facebook system. Once you're inside of Facebook.com, really it's all around the like and clicking like and using the like verb. They don't offer the same types of interactions that these third-party services do.
Where I took the post in my discussion on this is that normally when I talk to clients, I position things like and shares, for instance. So when you share something, whether it be sharing on Facebook, resharing somebody else's content, sharing your own original content, sharing that content also on Twitter, that it can be perceived and you should be prepared for it to be perceived as an endorsement of that content. And so if you're not prepared to have it be perceived that as an endorsement, and therefore kind of in a way be a judgment as to maybe something you support or some stance you have or something you believe in, then not to share it. And there is some gray areas as I've thought about it in regards to, how that might be slightly different on a case by case basis. But in general, if you look at that way, whenever you decide to share content, you'll also be a little bit more apt to take a peek at to what that content is, instead of just blindly maybe grab something and share it. That to me, content is perceived differently depending on the party, of course, who's paying attention to it, and then also there's in quantity. Content can actually shape perception about who you are. So if you start to share content and you're sharing something because you think it's kind of funny or whatever like that, and it happens to be lewd, doing it one time might not be that big of a deal. But if people see it shared often in that case, it could really shape people's perception of who you are as a person, and it works the same with brands as well.
One other thing to consider is, because Facebook makes this data available, you never really know where you're going to appear outside of the Facebook system. So there's been certain instances, and I'm trying to think of one that's well known, but there was, for instance, I believe it was an Intel campaign called the Museum of Me. And you could actually customize this experience using Facebook. So you would connect it to your Facebook account, and it would pull various photos of your friends and what they liked and things that you connected with, and it would create this interactive movie that was all about you, hence the name Museum of Me. But, think about that for a second. It's pulling specific data, and it's saying, oh, Adam likes podcasting. And so it would have a little section that was like, people that share your interest in podcasting. And you're showing up there just because you liked podcasting. You didn't like it and then go through and say, okay, well, Corey can use this like for anything he wants, even if he's doing this third-party service. And so as all of these other services start to connect into Facebook and pull out this like data and do different things with it, like you said, the like does signify more than just a casual, oh, check this out. It actually does essentially go onto your Facebook permanent record, and it can be used in a number of different ways. And so I think, especially as a brand and as a company, you need to be careful about what you are recommending and what you're putting your name behind, because even now, if those likes aren't necessarily being used and surfaced in other ways that are beyond what you intend, that doesn't mean that a year from now or 2 years from now, it's not going to pull up things that, a couple years back you might have reconsidered, but now it's out there and now it's getting shared with the world in ways that you're not necessarily comfortable with.
Yeah, and so some of the things that you can do and you can think about as a brand or a company when taking a look at things like your like is as I already mentioned, think of likes, think of sharing content, think of all those things as a potential endorsement, at least by perceived by others, and pay attention to what that content is and who your audience is and how they might perceive what it is that you end up sharing. And then secondly, pay attention to where the likes and other Facebook content, and again, this goes for other sites as well, this other social networks, but Facebook in particular because of their reach, pay attention to what you're connecting to yourself or your brand, whether it be, again, personally or professionally, and what sort of reach that content might have. Test it every, say, month or every couple months. Go and do an audit and see what content is on your site, where some content may have been shared previously. Is it still there in some shape or form? Is it being shared into somebody's stream? Do a little bit of experimentation so that when you share something, how does it show up to folks on their end? Because as I mentioned already, in a lot of cases, you end up getting sucked into your own experience and not understand how that ends up getting packaged and placed in front of your particular audience.
All right, so what do you say we jump from the network with nearly 1 billion members to a social network with almost 5,000 members? Whoa!
And that's actually a good thing for this particular network so far, right?
Yeah, so what we're talking about is app.net, app.net. And app.net emerged recently as initially an alternative to Twitter, though they do have aspirations to go beyond that and essentially serve as a backbone for various social media interactions. But what sets them apart is, from the very beginning, they are a paid social network. So in order to become a member of app.net, currently you have to pay $50 per year to apply for a membership. And in exchange, the creators of app.net have pledged to essentially keep app.net, the main service, advertising free. They looked at what Twitter was doing, they looked at what Facebook was doing, they saw some of the backlash against these networks essentially selling their users to advertisers in exchange for revenue, and they said, you know what, I think we can make an alternative here. And they did ride a little bit of the wave of negative publicity that Twitter was having, and managed to create an alternative social network. It was crowdfunded, so used a model very similar to Kickstarter. They basically said, hey, we need $500,000 to get this thing off the ground. They asked people to make donations. For a while, it was hit or miss. It wasn't looking like it was going to get funded, and then it got a little bit of last-minute support and actually blew by their $500,000 goal. I think they raised somewhere between $700,000 and $800,000 when all was said and done, and it got funded. And so now they're committing to building this network and presumably doing the best they can to actually turn it into a viable competitor for both Twitter and, like I said, eventually Facebook and other networks as well. Adam, have you had a chance to check out app.net at all?
I did actually check it out, and I haven't paid, so I haven't dove in to see what's being offered currently by the network. I did, read a few opinions from folks out there about it. My opinion is, I'm not going to discount anything that's different, meaning that's going against the grain, that's beyond what is currently being done by what would be quote unquote considered the norm, because everything that's happening right now, Twitter, Facebook, all these folks at one time or another were something new. And I think as well as I know, both in technology and in the digital marketing realm, that it's you would be surprised sometimes to see suddenly what pops out of nowhere and that people gravitate towards and thinks is awesome. I will say that their goal in this being that they're trying to create a social network that's free of advertising. I don't think people care that much about advertising, at least in the current forms that are out there on sites like Twitter and Facebook and even LinkedIn that has advertising. And that's primarily because at the moment it isn't as intrusive, I believe, as it could be. Now, that might change down the line when they need to change their models and do other things to really kind of keep their network sustainable. And you've got Facebook, for instance, that's now a publicly traded company, which might have to push the envelope a little bit more. And I think also that folks in general at the moment are accustomed to kind of, in a way, this micropayment thing of, buying an app for 99 cents or $2, and anything over $2, for some reason, people start to complain. At least the people, the younger generation that wasn't used to paying hundreds of dollars for pieces of software to use on their desktop computers, not too long ago, and still now for anybody who's using it professionally. And so $50, I think, is like, oh my gosh, $50, I think the interesting part of app.net is the fact that they're trying to, my understanding is they're trying to make it a platform that's available for people, for developers to tie into a lot of different services out there. And so with that, if they make a platform that is really, really flexible in that sense and really takes off because they've made it very developer friendly, then that could really change things a lot and make an incredible difference into how it's adopted, how popular it might be, and the utility aspect behind it, which would get some people really, I think, on board. So there's nothing so far other than the early adopter in me that makes me want to turn around and potentially spend the $50. I mean, what do you think? Are you going to fork over $50 to try it out?
I did, actually. I already joined. I joined when it was still in the Kickstarter phase, and so I am an active member of app.net. They, for a while, you could email them and say, hey, turn my account on, and they would basically manually go through and grant people access to the alpha version. They call it alpha because that's the name of their trial run. It was how they proved that app.net was a viable and actually functioning service. It is expensive, and I think one thing to keep in mind is that it is brand new, and so my guess would be it's not going to be $50 forever. They're using this $50 price point as really a gate to make sure that the people that are in there for the right reasons early. Even now, if you go to join.app.net and pay your $50, you don't get instant access. They are still gradually letting people in, and part of that is they're trying to avoid some of the fail whale scenario that Twitter had by gradually increasing the amount of people that they can support. So my guess would be once they get all of those issues sorted out, they'll probably lower the price in order to let more people in. But, it is a good thing to consider, like you said, that a lot of folks, anything beyond the $1 to $2 margin, they get a little unsure. And they're like, is this going to deliver the value that I'm paying for? Though, at $1 to $2, it's kind of funny to talk about the value of that $2. I think it's interesting. So one example, you had talked about users not necessarily pushing back against the advertising. And I did have one example that really highlighted some of the things that could start to frustrate me in the future. So Adam, last week you and I actually participated in Mobile Chat, which is a weekly Twitter chat that takes place, and they use the hashtag mobile chat to actually aggregate the conversation. And I was participating on it, but I was actually traveling at the time, so I had to use my phone to participate. So I had loaded up the Twitter app, and I had a search going for mobile chat, and I was keeping up with the conversation that way. And what was challenging is the top third of the window was a sponsored tweet that didn't have the hashtag Twitter chat in it. So I'm on this tiny little bit of real estate, and at most I can see like 3 tweets, and it's already hard to keep up with a Twitter chat on your phone as is because things move so fast and you're trying to reload and you don't have the best data connections, so things are a little slow. And then every time I reloaded the page, I had to look at this giant ad at the top, and I'm like, it doesn't have the hashtag in it. It's not at all what I'm trying to talk about. It's just taking up space, and I saw it. I get it. It's there. Hide it the next time I reload the page, and sure enough, reload, and there it is again. And I'm like, this is ridiculous. This is actually taking away a significant amount of usability from the app in order to show me this brand that is just annoying me over and over and over again. So,
it's a hashtag for that. Hashtag early adopter problems, right? Is that
yes, exactly. So similar to first world problems. So yes, I will admit this is a bit of an early adopter problem. And for most people, they're not participating in Twitter chats. This wouldn't be that big of a deal to just scroll by that ad.
But I think taking room on a mobile device for advertising could ruin the experience no matter what, right? In the future, if Twitter wants to do something similar like they did for NASCAR and some of these other things, or anybody that in a mobile fashion who wants to cover an event and say, follow us and participate in the conversation in mobile, I think that what you're saying makes sense as a potential frustration.
The other thing that it made me consider is the fact that because it's paid, that doesn't necessarily mean it's hostile to brands. And so they're not putting this message out saying, we're the paid network, and we're totally against brands. We don't like companies. I think it's actually the opposite. They're basically saying, hey, if you want to fork over the money and participate along with us, that's fine. You just can't pay to force yourself into our conversation. If you're here and you're providing value, we'll still follow you and we'll still subscribe to your updates. But you can't just.
But what form does that take? I mean, what form does something like that take if it's not some sort of paid placement or advertising? Like you said, is it somebody participating in the conversation? And I mean, what do you think?
I think that's exactly right. I think it's the old school Twitter way, where back in the day, in order to get a popular Twitter account, you had to work at it. You had to create great content. You had to engage with people. You had to continually provide value. Now that's not necessarily the case. Now it's the brands with the biggest pocketbooks can open up those pocketbooks, pay money to Twitter to stick their tweets at the very top of every screen you load on the Twitter mobile app, and naturally they're going to get followers from that. They might burn a few bridges along the way and they might piss some people off, but they're still going to have much bigger numbers. And so how do you compete with that as a smaller brand? If you're, Joe's Crab Shack and you've just got a single restaurant down the street, you're starting to get drowned out by these giant brands. What about if you're Joe's Crab Shack really trying to build your network, and then every time somebody reloads the page, there's, some chain lobster store with their tweet right on top of yours saying, hey, come on down and, save $10 off your next purchase. It definitely separates those that have the marketing budget from those that don't, versus a network where everyone's essentially equal and it's only being judged on the value of the content that you're sharing.
So, in essence, what you're saying is that in a network where people are paying, they likely are paying because they want to participate, because they want to have a sort of qualitative discussion versus maybe something that might be a little bit more trivial, or they might be a little more half-hearted on Twitter, or maybe there's more bots than there should be on there, so you don't know what the quality of the audience is. And so therefore, because you've got an audience that's more invested in that network, that by you, there's more of an opportunity to engage with those folks. They're going to be more engaged, so you can engage with them a little bit more versus what you might do on other networks, which would be, just essentially paying to have your content rise to the top or be more visible, really in more of an advertisement form.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And I think the key word that you said is invested. People are literally invested in the network. And for Twitter, a lot of times people were invested in it, but they were invested in terms of time. So they had invested a lot of time to build up their network and build up their content library. But when you're a brand new social network, it's hard to really figure out who's going to invest over the long run and who's just here and hey, maybe they're gone in a week or two. I think putting a price of entry up in front of the door and saying, hey, only those that are really willing to, put some money on the table and invest both time and energy into participating in this network are allowed in. I think that does indicate that people are more likely to look for conversations, look for engagement, look for other accounts to connect to, and open up those conversations and be more willing to connect with others because there's a bit of a shared camaraderie there. So, definitely something to consider.
So paying for a network also changes the whole, almost in a way, paradigm of how people perceive participating in that network. And what do you think brands should do? I mean, should pay attention. Folks should pay for a year at $50 at app.net and kind of check out what's going on there and see how they might be able to take advantage of that shift in how a social network is perceived and therefore developed and created.
For certain industries, yes. I think if you're in the technology industry, the advertising industry, the marketing industry, I think getting an app.net account at $50 is almost a must. Like, get in there early, be amongst those users that are helping to grow the service. Because like you said, you never know when the next greatest social network could take off. And maybe it is app.net and maybe it's not. But I think $50 as a brand is a very small price to pay to make sure that, hey, if it does take off, you've got a foot in the door, you've got an account, and you've already started to build that up. Of course, as with all things that we suggest on this, it does need to be considered in an overall marketing engagement. So if the entirety of your social media participation is a Facebook page, then maybe app.net shouldn't be the second thing that you do. But if you've got if you've got a team that's handling it, or if you're the type of person that likes going out and trying some of these new tools, by all means, check app.net out. Sign up for an account. Like I said, it does take a little bit to get approved for their alpha build, but my experience with it so far has been positive, and I think there's a lot of committed people. There's a lot of developer support for it. I do see Twitter struggling potentially in the coming months as they try to deal with the API issues that we've talked about previously. So I think it's got a fighting chance to at least become a viable alternative in the mid to near future.
To close it out, and you would be able to know more than I, Corey, I would assume that right now, because of the payment gateway, that there's likely a lot of what you would consider early adopters, people who are, like you said, developers, early adopters, people in the technology world, but people also in the social media world that would likely also be considered influencers that are there. So getting in early right now and actually being able to kind of, in a way, bump elbows with those folks in a network like that without the intrusion of large crowds of folks that may be in there 6 months from now or a year from now is also an interesting proposition for some folks.
Yeah, definitely. And again, it's only for very specific industries, but technology, that type of thing, where you're really trying to find ways of engaging these influential users and hey, just getting their opinion on things, seeing what they're talking about, what's interesting them. I think that it's a go-to for that type of audience, and it's a great way to interact with those people and interact with that type of user who's really looking to be an early adopter and interact with other companies and other people that also consider themselves early adopters.
All right, I might fork over some dough then.
All right, I sold one. I got one additional.
Is that an affiliate program over there? Is that what it is?
No, it is not yet. But hey, maybe I can make a suggestion too.
So we got a tool review this week, right?
We do. So PinReach, formerly PinClout, and I think this is something that you had played around with a little bit. Is that right?
Yeah, I played around with it when it was PinClout, and I wonder why they had to change their name. Because the tool itself is kind of a hybrid of a clout for Pinterest users. So it kind of provides what it considers the influence reach or influence score for a Pinterest user, 1 out of 100, similar to Clout. And interestingly enough, it also shows a lot of metrics. It's almost like it shows you your own microcosm of you yourself, information around your particular pins and boards. And then additionally, it shows the whole Pinterest community at large. And so I found it interesting in the sense that, the number itself that it gives you is not necessarily all that important. But taking a look at your content and what are things like your most popular board, your most popular pins, the pins that seem to be getting the most retweets. Some of these sorts of things are kind of hard actually for you to do quickly on your own. I like how it shows you, for instance, since you last updated, how many additional pins have you added? How many repins have you garnered across all your pins, and likes and new followers and so on? So it gives you all what I consider, some fairly important overall metrics in one snapshot. The other thing that I find is kind of interesting about it as well is that it allows you to check out what they consider influential followers. So in the past, we've covered things like brands that have done outreach to Pinterest followers or people that they would consider influential on Pinterest, and they've done things like, and I don't remember what it was. I think it was like Tampax or something like that, where it was some feminine company that went ahead and reached out to a bunch of people on Pinterest and found out what they liked by going and checking out what they enjoyed or pinned in certain boards, and then they had artists go ahead and make those products up for them, and they sent them a product. They sent them a gift essentially, and kind of tied their brand to it and so on. And so initially they had to, of course, identify influencers out of the folks that they had out there in general that they wanted to reach out to, and PinReach actually helps with that. They let you take a look at your own kind of microcosm of folks who are following you and which of those folks are most influential. But then you can also look at Pinterest as a whole and check out who are the hottest pinners from the entire social network, and what are the most popular pins and stuff like that as well. And so I think it has some interesting insight from different perspectives. You might find use only from what it is that's happening in your own microcosm, or you might just want to use it just to check out what's the hottest type of content that's out there that's being pinned by folks, and who are the most influential members on the network. And so what it takes to sign up really is just going to pinreach.com, signing up with your Pinterest account, and just letting it chug for a few minutes as it pulls up your data and tells you all this cool stuff.
Yeah, and one of the things that I really like about this tool is that it doesn't require you to alter the way that you're using Pinterest. It just comes in on the back end and analyzes your data. So we've looked at tools in the past that required you to use custom URLs in order to track the reach of those pins, and then we saw Pinterest come in and actually shut down some of those URLs that had tracking data attached to it. So I like the idea that this just comes in, it evaluates your account, it says, hey, look, this is the content that's working well, here's some trends we're noticing, here's some actions you could potentially take to increase your Pinterest influence. So I think this is a great tool to check out. It seems to be one of the leading tools in the emerging market of Pinterest analytics. So hey, if you're one of those brands or one of those users that's been liking Pinterest and wanting to take your Pinterest experience to the next level, I think PinReach is definitely something to check out. I recommend it.
All right. I knew we hadn't covered a Pinterest thing for a while, so we needed to get that out of our system and talk about it. But what do we got next here?
Up next is the one, the only lightning round. And I got my phone back this time, so I can actually count this one down. So without further ado, let's jump right in. 60 seconds on the clock, ready and go. So this is a new tool announced by Visually. Visually is the infographic social network, and they're actually starting to engage with brands and allow brands to create branded infographics. And at first I was like, well, aren't all infographics kind of branded? Branding isn't exactly something that's foreign to the infographic world, but what this is are infographics that you can connect your own accounts to, and it actually churns and spits out customized infographics based on your own data, which you can then share with your audience. And I thought this was really cool. So one of the examples was a beer brand that partnered with them. And so you'd put this in and it would show you who your top friends are and what content you're talking about. And then here and there and throughout the infographic, there's little bits of branding, but it's pretty subtle. And so it actually encourages you to share it with your friends. It gets the branding out there. It's using that infographic aesthetic. I thought this was a really cool tool and, an interesting use of infographic style. All right, there's the buzzer. 60 seconds on the clock. Adam, what is your take on branded infographics? Go.
So Visually has been talking about doing this for some time. They've been primarily a way of kind of quickly generating stuff based off of your social profile data, and they have a gallery, so to speak, of other folks that have put together stuff on the site. Quite honestly, I haven't had a chance to look at this that much. I honestly, you got me, Corey. You got me. I haven't had a chance to look at it that much here. I think anything that's going to help people. I think when you create infographics, if you have the opportunity to make the same looking infographic as the next person, there's an issue with that. And you got to be careful about making things that stylistically aren't being told with your voice and your brand. So it's great that there are tools out there, but to be able to do something that really matches your brand and your particular look and feel and voice is much better than using something that's automated.
All right at the buzzer. I'll have to give you a little bit more heads up next time so you can dive into this one. But I think it's still a valid point. I think being careful with the way that your brand is presented to others and potentially people seeing the same looking thing over and over and over again is going to dilute that. So
it's like stock photography, right? I mean, how many times is that really hot downloaded image going to be used by 13 brands on their homepage? And how many times, you've seen that one photo of the people shaking hands, the business people shaking hands on every single homepage, right?
Oh, yes.
So, all right, we're going past our 1 minute mark. Go for it.
All right, 60 seconds on the clock for topic number 2. Ready, go. So this is called Counting Sheep with Path Data Science. And really interesting post here. It actually appeared on the Path blog. Path is a social network. So what are they doing with data science? Well, much like a well-known dating site, which has done amazing things with the data that they collect on users, Path actually has some access to interesting data. And one of those is the fact that a lot of users log when they go to bed and they log when they wake up. So Path can actually use that data to create graphs about how various people sleep. And they created little infographics for this that show that, older people go to bed earlier but also wake up earlier. People that go to the gym more often go to bed earlier versus people that go to bars more often. Not really a surprise there, but actually people that run go to bed almost, or actually more than a half hour earlier than the average person, but they also wake up a half hour earlier. Really interesting data being shared there. All right, Adam, what is your take on Path's use of data? Go.
Yeah, so I mean, quick background on it is Path allows you to actually say when you're going to bed. So it's almost like telling the whole social network, "Hey, I'm going to bed, good night," and that's your status in a way. And it locks out the social network until you actually get back on and say that you've woken up, and it actually logs the time that ends up happening. And then there's a few other things here, like that they also have Nike running data in there and so on. So this is a really awesome, interesting use of that data. It shows the power of aggregate data all together. And in fact, it would be interesting to see how Path, beyond visualizing this data, might be able to use something like this in a different way. I mean, it's the same thing with Facebook. Facebook is collecting data in mass from all of these actions and verbs and things that are happening, and some really interesting data can crop up from those sorts of things. So I think this is showing the power of data in the hands of a social network that could collect it in mass and then display it out for its users.
All right at the buzzer yet again. Well timed. All right, so let's round out this lightning round with story number 3. 60 seconds on the clock. Ready and go. So this is actually a look at Foursquare's Save to Foursquare button. And this is something that I used a lot recently because I'm planning a trip to Boston, and I actually planned that entire trip inside of Foursquare. So I used their Explore feature, I browsed around, I found places that I wanted to eat, breweries that I wanted to stop at, tourist destinations, and I actually added it all to a Foursquare list using the Save To button inside of Foursquare. But Foursquare actually allows other companies to add this Save To button onto their own website. So if you were a restaurant, you could have a Foursquare Save To button. If somebody was logged in, they could save it to their account, and then the next time they walk by your restaurant, it would remind them, "Hey, remember that time you saw this restaurant? It seemed like you liked it. Why don't you stop in and take a look?" I don't know if other people are going to use this. I'm kind of an early adopter, so I was more willing to dive in and play around with it more, but I thought it was a really cool feature and potentially something that a local business could get a lot of additional foot traffic out of. All right, 60 seconds on the clock. What's your take on Foursquare's Save To button?
I think that Foursquare, we all put like buttons on our social stuff. We put, or on our content. We put Twitter buttons and LinkedIn buttons and pin buttons. I think the thing that people don't do as often as they should is take a look at what Foursquare has to offer, because they do have a lot of interesting things that could be tied directly to location-based services. And so I think people should definitely take a look at what we have here. I don't think users are accustomed to using it yet, which is the unfortunate part. As you can see at the bottom of the post, when we link to it in the show notes, that they actually tell you, well, here's a bunch of places you could use it. And they cover everything from Yelp to Zagat to Google Maps to OpenTable, Expedia, New York's Times Restaurants, TripAdvisor. So they're showing you all these places that would be prime examples for you to go ahead and bookmark all this stuff for you to use later. So I think people need to pay attention to this, and hopefully the use of it will be on the rise.
All right, Adam, you were right on the button for all 3 of those stories. I like your 60-second internal clock. It is working quite well.
Well, and you holding it up to the screen and, pointing at it really frantically like that, scaring the heck out of me really does. It works as well.
All right, so one last thing for today, which is our action item. We have been doing a great job of giving people one actionable thing that you can do over the coming week to dive a little deeper into, something that we've covered on the show, or at least, a quick little something that you can do to take your social, local, or mobile marketing to the next level. And today what we're going to talk about is auditing your authorized Twitter applications. So hopefully users know, but every time you are presented with one of those login with Twitter buttons, it actually gives that application kind of permanent access to your Twitter account. And most of the time, that's all fine and dandy. These are accounts that you want to use. You leave that door open. You can use them on an ongoing basis, but occasionally apps go out of date, or they get sold, or you just stop using it, and it's probably a good idea to go back through and check what applications you've given access to, because you don't want too many of these open doors out there, and potentially something could happen through that. Again, something gets sold, maybe it gets passed around, and suddenly the person who owns that application isn't somebody that you would want to have access to your site. So we'll include a link to this in the show notes. It's pretty easy to go to. It's actually just inside of the settings area of Twitter's homepage. You log into your account, you go to settings, then you click on what's called apps. What's nice is it's organized by the time that you added them. So if you want to, you can just scroll all the way to the bottom, and that'll show you the oldest or the first things that you authorized. That's probably a good place to start, because, hey, if you look in there and you don't recognize something, just revoke the access. The worst thing that's going to happen is the next time that tries to access your Twitter account, it says, oops, I can't access it anymore, and it pings you and says, hey, I need you to reauthorize. So there isn't really a penalty to revoking access unless it's something that's trying to, archive your tweets on an ongoing basis. But if that's the case, you're probably aware of those and you'll recognize the name, and you can leave that access in place. So definitely check this out. Definitely go through, on a semi-annual basis. This might be a good thing to add as a calendar reminder, and every 6 months go through and just trim through this list and remove old applications. But I think it's important to keep a eye on this data and make sure that it remains accurate, because, like I said, you don't want other companies that might not have your best interest at heart to have access to your Twitter account.
All right, is it time for that wrap up? Here we have nothing else. My brain's melting with these new lights. I feel like it's one thing to be visible, it's another thing to be like melting live on the Google Hangout.
Well, and as we talked about before, this is always the toughest part of the show. It's the transition from the main show to the meta show, where we talk about all the fun ways that you can connect with us. But, as always, we covered a lot today, but we do encourage you to reach out, because we'd love to hear from you. We'd love to know if you have any questions, any suggested topics, if you want to give us feedback, or even if you just want to say hi. We definitely encourage that. So there's a number of ways to do that. The first of which would be via Twitter. You can reach both Adam and I at Solo Mo Show. We're happy to answer questions directly via the show's Twitter account, or I'm available directly at Corey O'Brien.
And I'm at Secret Sushi. You can also email us. We'll both look at the email and see what you got to say. We'd love to get an email from you at solomoshow@gmail.com is the email address. We're, of course, on Facebook. We have a Facebook page. Just go ahead and take a look. Search for us on Facebook. You will find the page. You'll see that a nice big blue logo pop up there. And like us on Facebook. We take likes more seriously than some people. And then you can find us on Google Plus, where we have a brand page, as well as a Pinterest board where you can repin our episodes to your heart's content to all the folks that you're connected to there.
There we go. And as always, all of the links that we discussed today, as well as the links that we just mentioned to connect with us on our social channels, can be found in the show notes. And these are available either at solomoshow.com, that's our main website, or more than likely in your podcast player of choice. So look around, you should have an option to view show notes, and we include a whole bunch of content there so that you can dig a little deeper into the topics that we discussed. As always, we do want to give a big thanks and shout out to our listeners. We really appreciate you joining us each week. We hope that you get a lot of useful content out of these shows. And
can I add something to that?
You sure can.
I want to thank Michelle Poppy and Amy Higgins for watching us in the live stream. I'm not sure who else is watching us here on the live stream, but thank you to you two for watching us live. And Amy was asking all kinds of great questions and sending us comments and stuff like that on Twitter. And we love to have that live interaction. So thank you guys with that. In addition to it, I know you're going to get to asking folks to rate us on iTunes, Corey. We've got a number of great ratings and so on that have popped up over the last week. But the thing that I think I want to add, and you'll echo it too with me here, Corey, is that we want to make it to the new and noteworthy podcasts on iTunes. And in order to be featured there, you have to have a lot of great reviews up there, both the stars and actually written reviews. And over time, it will get us up there, and that will dramatically help us in getting some listeners to the show. So it would be really awesome if you're listening to the show right now. Please, 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 when we wrap this up in 30 seconds here, go to iTunes, put up a rating, put up your honest feedback in a review. Hopefully it's not a 2-star, 3-star one. Hopefully we get you at a 4 or 5, and hopefully it'll get us up there in the new and noteworthy podcasts.
There we go. I would love to see it. I will take a screenshot of that and mount it on the wall the day that we are in the new and noteworthy. That would be awesome.
I will too. I'll post it on app.net after I pay my $50.
All right. And with that, we will call this episode a wrap. And we hope that you join us next week for another great episode of The Solo Mo Show.
Thank you. Take care.